TLDR, Gongja is an absolute Chad and his growth in SSS-class Hunter symbolically represents authenticity over inauthenticity, hope over nihilistic pessimism, and overcoming hardships through sheer desire to improve. Normally, when I read webtoons, I tend to turn half of my brain off to avoid thinking too hard so I can actually enjoy lower quality writing and the occasional cringe. I naturally went back into this half-brained, and prior to reading it I'd have never imagined that I would come to enjoy it as much as I have. At first glance, SSS-class Su1c1de Hunter just looks like your usual go back in time, predict everything and become strong, rich, etc. with magic and hunters and gates and stuff, but it quickly becomes apparent on deeper analysis that this is a fantastic literary gem. Here's a quick recap of the very start of the story. Click ahead to this timestamp here for the analysis. The story starts with Gongja, a deadbeat F-class hunter who's physically and mentally depleted beyond your average horticulturist. After watching a broadcast of the arrogant top-ranked hunter, the Flame Emperor, Gongja wallows in his envy seconds before he receives a blessing of the skill from the tower, only to realise that this skill is to copy others' skills by dying at their hands. Despite of this paradox, he somehow ends up in a tight spot by witnessing a murder by the Flame Emperor himself, is killed by him, and manages to copy the one skill card that lets him survive his death. He returns to the start of the day and realises that his new skill, Returner's Clock, enables him to now utilise his once useless skill, as well as the fact that he is now practically impervious to death. Gongja's personality does a complete 180 as he decides to travel back in time to prevent the Flame Emperor from ever becoming who he is in the present. The story then continues with his revenge and his exploits as he gradually becomes stronger and overcomes greater obstacles as the secrets of the tower gradually unravel themselves. The plot itself is highly unique and takes a very new, refreshing take on the tower genre, where heroes attempt to climb a tower with trials of increasing difficulties. Instead of the approach of generic different monsters each level, each series of levels have been associated with a certain deeper theme, asking critical questions to the meaning of morality and life to Gongja, and thus, to an extension, the reader. The story of Gongja's journey and the various flaws can be likened to his development as a character itself and inner conflicts that he overcomes by metaphorically and physically climbing over his troubles. The ground floor outside of the tower represents an existential dread and defeatism. The 10th floor represents abandonment and insecurity stemming from his orphaned origin, much like the final boss of the floor. The 11th to 20th, authenticity, i.e. living in the truth and not in a facade of such. I'll explain that in a sec. And the latest 21st floor representing realistic pessimism versus unrealistic hope. The theme of authenticity, being true to oneself, is explored in the motifs of the Demon King of the Autumn's Reign. The Demon King represents inauthenticity, one who acted out of their character in exchange for social conformity. In the story, she heals those who seek her out by effectively consuming them and creating a new healthy copy which is indistinguishable from the original. Gongja subdues her reign of terror while declaring that she, in making excuses for her murder, is no different from the kings or soldiers that had persecuted her for her actions, and declares that he believes in karmic justice. Gongja here represents the authentic, acting out of his own will and desire. This is seen in many different scenes, when he is asked what he wants from the public, when he doesn't claim infinite lottery wins despite being able to do so, and when he accepts saving the 10th to 20th floors without any recognition despite knowing he personally will have less material gain and recognition. On the 21st floor, the Heavenly Demon herself affirms this as she looks back on Gongja's white lies, stating that she should have seen through his lies as he was never someone that would chase something as superficial as reputation. Gongja forfeits such things in pursuit of something he regards to have higher value, justice, devotion, and his yearning to improve. He acts independently and is not motivated or moved by external pressure to adopt a given way of life, also known as authenticity. The main takeaway here may be telling us readers to perhaps live life more authentically, to be who we are while remaining within reasonable constraints of ethics and morality. The entire work of SSS-class Su1c1de Hunter is a distinct stand against pessimistic philosophies such as those proposed by Schopenhauer, who in his most famous work published in 1818, The World as Will and Representation, suggests that, quote, "It is through the will, the in itself of all existence, that humans find their suffering." In other words, that desire is the root of suffering and pain, similar to earlier Buddhist doctrines of thinking. Schopenhauer also wrote the following, All enjoyment is negative, only has the effect of removing pain, while pain or evil is the actual positive element. SSS-class Su1c1de Hunter vehemently claims the opposite of the pessimistic dogma of Schopenhauer and Buddhist views towards desire and want, and instead portrays Gongja as the living antithesis of such beliefs. He himself shows complete reinvigoration and rebirth through the gain of more desires after receiving his powers, when compared to his original, soulless, defeatist self. The author suggests to us that, no, complete abstention of desire is not effective nor healthy, but that moderation is desirable, lest one swings to the opposite extreme, represented by the late Flame Emperor. This is in line with Confucian ideals which support repressing desire for moral good, something that ties in with Gongja's name as well as his behaviour, but not outright defining desire as the main cause of suffering. This is clearly shown in his declaration after clearing 412. The me of today has nothing to be ashamed of, unlike the soulless, defeatist self that he had once been. This screams to the reader to dare to dream and to dare to try. In addition to the changes Gongja's view of life itself, SSS-class Su1c1de Hunter also clearly declares its stance on nihilism and pessimism through the final fight between the Heavenly Demon and the Red Ghost. The Red Ghost's victory over the Heavenly Demon in their fight of the tongue directly mirrors Gongja's inner struggles. The Red Ghost represents a dazzling yet failed dream, how he in his world came to the 99th floor of the tower but ultimately failed, while the Heavenly Demon portrays the acceptance of pain and suffering as the primary elements of life, much like Schopenhauer. This echoes how Gongja's will to fight and dream of a better future, even if it is to potentially fail, is preferable to surrendering to a realistic yet fatalistic acceptance of life. Even the Heavenly Demon herself, the representation of realistic pessimism in the story, ultimately shows appreciation of Gongja's actions and thanks him for only ever having looked to aid her from the very beginning, despite his white lies. Gongja tearfully gives a farewell to his passing master as he proclaims that the winter has split, a metaphor for him overcoming his darkness, pessimism and fatalistic character that has enveloped him for so long prior to the start of the story. The author of SSS Hunter boasts their incredible repertoire of writing, suspense, foreshadowing and humour, which paired with their fantastic ability to convey emotions and pair them with brilliant artwork makes for an absolutely phenomenal piece of fiction. When you read this for the first time, the series has many of these moments where you're able to think and come to realise what the main character is about to do. It's a very thin line between foreshadowing and being boringly predictable, but that thin line is not crossed in this webtoon. Really, the true greatness of the author's writing abilities comes to light in the Murray arc, i.e. Floor 21. This, in my opinion, is the author's Mona Lisa, Four Seasons and Hamlet. The previous arcs utterly pale in comparison to these chapters. Aside from the metaphorical and philosophical depth as discussed, the author heavily relies on vivid imagery of emotionally charged scenes, using their powerful literary ammunition to describe heart-striking strokes of suffering that most of us would never even consider in the comforts of our lives. This, paired with the masterful artwork, gives rise to a beautiful combination which conveys the raw emotions of the scene to its very core. When Gongja feels pain, the reader feels pain. When Gongja feels hunger, the reader feels hunger. When Gongja feels the overwhelmingly difficult nature of the different deaths, the reader feels it as such. Furthermore, the change in colours is symbolically used to help convey the changes in Gongja himself. His surroundings are originally illustrated with muted, grey colours, which contrasts heavily with the Flame Emperor and his crimson theme. A colour of power, strength and aggression, which Gongja reveres prior to the start of the story. After his return in time, Gongja begins to dress in red, symbolically representing how his role in his story is similar to that of the Flame Emperor. However, unlike the Flame Emperor who is solely ever represented by red, i.e. power and strength, Gongja wears different colours, including wardrobes of green and black, but always wearing an inner white shirt, much like the one he was wearing at the start of the story, suggesting that his core ideals have not changed and will not change. This provides visual affirmation of Gongja's steadfast, righteous nature despite external changes in his personality. Another point that I must commend SSS Su1c1de Hunter on, other than its great prose, pacing and philosophical depth, is its ability to create a story, not just a time-killing webtoon. Gongja doesn't master the sword style utilising the emotions of death by hunger, thirst or cold, without first experiencing hunger, thirst or cold. He doesn't solve things unrealistically on the first try. Things don't happen purely for advancing the plot, such as gaining abilities or powers for no reason. All of these are well meshed into the story, and everything is earned through blood, sweat and tears. Furthermore, despite being a returner by 11 years, he doesn't know the solution to all of the problems of old, which makes for a far more interesting story over many others which have a perfect, infallible main character who remembers every small detail of the past or alternate world that they had experienced, often alone. No piece is without fault, and perhaps there may be small holes that you might be able to pick at in Gongja's story. Primarily, the tower-style design of the story. Certain characters are parts of the inherent story of the tower and are thus constrained to specific levels. This means that we're highly unlikely to see many characters that we've grown accustomed to, and to a degree it's understandable that people may become tired from constant losses of endearing characters. Nevertheless, while I do agree with this sentiment to a degree, I personally find the extensive world building and character development of even expendable figures much deeper and enjoyable compared to the very superficial nature of many other webtoons, as it greatly improves the immersion and continuity of the story. The one and only potential problem I find with the story is that Gongja shows an unbelievably fast 180-degree change in personality between the first two chapters. He somehow goes from having a completely nihilistic, defeatist approach to life to suddenly accepting his newfound powers and becoming a truly benevolent, selfless hunter per his namesake. Nevertheless, I personally think that SSS Hunter provides an incredible fresh approach in a highly saturated and overdone genre, and proves that it is still possible to create an absolute masterpiece in a cesspool of self-affirming derivatives. It manages to achieve what it does not only by its sharp, witty writing with depth and humour, but in tandem with the perfectly complementary and beautiful artwork. If you haven't, what are you doing? Please do go read it now. Indisputable minimum S tier.